Hey guys, it's Mr. Andrews here. Just wanted to check in with y'all. So a couple things you should know. First off, please see the announcement about some of the changes and adjustments. This is a school-wide thing, but the blue and gold schedule has changed. So after spring break, starting April 13th, we are moving to a 4-day school week. Mondays and Wednesdays will be gold days, Tuesdays, Thursdays, blue days, and that will continue until at least we go back physically, if we go back physically. If we don't, we will continue going on that schedule until May 21st, which would be the early last day of school. So a 4-day week should help to simplify things a little bit. That'll reduce the number of check-ins I have with you guys to just 2 times a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that should provide a nice consistent schedule. If you guys want a conference with me, I want to just say, know that you're always welcome to do that. It's not a bother at all. There's a lot of flexibility right now since I don't have concrete school times. So, just reach out to me if you want to talk about the POD, if you want to reflect on what you're doing with your paper. We can have a conversation still. I may not be able to give you as much commentary as I would like to, or as you would like me to, but I can still ask questions and we can still have a conversation. So, the other thing I wanted to talk about today is what you see on the screen in front of me. I want to talk a little bit about revising the paper. So what I've done is I pulled up an example AP research paper. This particular research essay is about stress differences in gender. It's one of the sample papers we have on our Canvas site. This is a one that received a score of 5. So the reason why I wanted to go through it was to point out a few highlighted areas and to provide some commentary on that, and just really to give you some tips based on this particular example of what you can do now to revise your essay. But before I get into all that, let me just say that the PODs, you guys did a really great job on those. Overall, I was thoroughly impressed by what I was seeing in them. And I know that some of you may be really happy with your score. Some of you may be less than happy with your score. But in all cases, I wanted this to be an exercise where even if it wasn't counting towards your AP score, that you were still getting some valuable feedback in the form of your grade and in the form of some comments. So please do look on your grade on Canvas. If you go to the assignment and look at where your submission would have been or is, you should see a sidebar there on the side. In there should be a video, a piece of video feedback from me if you've received a grade. If you haven't received a grade yet, that will be coming. I'm finishing them between today and tomorrow. I've got a little bit of a backlog, but the grades and the commentary should be in there. I've tried to provide somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes of commentary for everybody, just giving them not only an explanation of what they got, but an explanation of what they can do better in the essay based on what I was seeing, okay? So let's take a look at this introduction here, okay? So a couple things that you'll notice right away if we look at this one, right? Let's look at the introduction real quick. So they open, the brain is one of the most, let me pull up my thingy. Okay, the brain is one of the most complicated yet important structures in the human body. And humans have been striving to understand the beautiful complexity for centuries. One of the most basic and commonly known functions of the brain is known as fight or flight, reaction to stress. Stress, in my research and others, has been defined in 3 parts. So the very first thing you'll notice, like straight out of the gate, this paper is introducing key terms, key definitions. So one of the things I would suggest is look back at your introduction now that you have the luxury of having something that's already there, right? And really ask yourself, like, am I introducing and defining some of the key terms that I need to right from the get-go? You want to think of this first portion as highlighting key concepts that are foundational to your research. And the way that this student does that is by defining these key background and foundational concepts that are going to be important to the rest of the paper. They do so quickly. Notice they don't really take their time, right, dilly-dallying around that. Furthermore, you'll notice that right after this brief introduction to some of the overlying concepts, right, they give just a quick preview of the direction they're moving in. They say all 3 parts come together to define stress. And for the context of this paper, the stress looked at will be academic stress. So going on, then they get into a section they've labeled physiological stress response, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can organize your literature review. If you go back, and I know you've already written this, but I say organize because it's possible that looking back at this, you may think, okay, now that I know what the research process looks like as a whole, now that I've completed it, maybe there's a better way to approach this. Maybe there's a better way to introduce this than what I was first thinking at the beginning of this, right? You now have the luxury of hindsight, so leverage that. There are a lot of ways you can organize this review, and some people will do it chronologically. They'll just go through, here's where the research started, and here's, throughout the years how it developed and changed, and here's where we are. But some will split it into topical clusters, and that's what you're seeing here. This person splits it into these topical clusters, right? These are areas where they clump together information pertaining to various concepts that come together and inform their research. So with hindsight, this might even make more sense to go back at, because now I'm thinking, okay, maybe physiological stress response is a great place to start. Maybe it's good for me to go into the research that shows these stress responses, these fight or flight pieces, right? Another thing that you'll notice if you just look at this highlighted section here is the density of information. You see, like, almost every sentence is being cited, right? The literate review is a great place to establish a lot of information. And so it should be dense with information at some points. It's really okay that that is happening. And in fact, it should be happening. You want a firm basis in the existing research. So it is still not too late to go back and find what were some of the particulars of the research that maybe would provide even better context for your research. Note too that they're paraphrasing. I don't know if you've noticed, but in this highlighted part right here, not a single quote, right? A lot of citation, but not a single quote. Why is that? Well, primarily they're paraphrasing so that they can synthesize that information and bring it together. They're trying to put these sources into a conversation with each other. You did this last year when you were writing your IRRs. You were synthesizing information and bringing it together and putting those sources in conversation with each other. That's exactly what you should be doing in the lit review. You want to think of the lit review as sort of a glorified RRR, right? It brings those things together. You also want to think of it as a narrative that sets up the story you are trying to tell, a story that you are going to make your grand entrance into. So as we can see, paraphrasing is part of that. If you were to just quote sentences directly from the sources, it's unlikely that that quote is going to fit and splice perfectly into whatever conversation you're trying to depict here. So instead, I would encourage you to strongly consider putting these ideas from the sources in your own words so that you can more fluidly put them into conversation with each other and make those connections between them. In this case, they're making those connections in these nice topical clusters. So physiological stress response. Another way to think about dividing the lit review too is not just in terms of like these topical clusters, but you could also divide it in terms of competing perspectives, right? In this example, for instance, you'll see that one of the competing perspectives here has to do with this idea about gender differences, right? This is a theory that has emerged on their topic that represents one of those theories. This section has to do with how maybe the field is attempting to confront the topic, right? And one of these strands they notice is this strand that gender differences make no difference, or no impact rather. But then there's this other point of view, that perception of stress in males and females, the perception of it, right? So you'll note that if we're thinking of the lit review as a narrative, right, the story should lead to your research. And likewise, this author has sort of started with these more conceptual and foundational concepts, moved into then some of the debating theories, and moved specifically into perceptions of stress in males and females. So they're becoming much more specific as they go. Each topic or each area is like another breadcrumb that is leading us towards their grand entrance, right? They're moving us from their general context to the more specific context for their question and research, which has to do with examining stress by sex. And then down here, if we skip ahead to this section, right, we'll notice that this is where they finally, in their lit review, by creating their grand entrance. Now, what does the grand entrance look like, right? This is the identification of the gap in the research. Some of you struggled with this in your presentation, so I want to emphasize that this is really an important piece, because this is where you create a justification for everything that follows. Okay, so it's not just background that you're providing in the lit review, it's also a justification. You're providing an argument as to why your research matters and why your research has a purpose, right? So that is a really important piece that I don't want you to forget about this lit review. And that's exactly what they do here. They say, although there is no prior research done on the differences of stress in males and females, there is prior research rather. Little research is done for students at the high school level. What is evident, however, is how prominent stress is at that age, regardless of gender. A survey produced by the American Psychological Association in 2014 showed teens on average had a stress level of 5.8 on a 10-point scale, while adults had an average of 5.1. So they're bringing in more research in the conversation, but they're using that research now at this point to demonstrate a specific gap, a specific open question that is left open by the field. Now, a couple of things to think about is that it could be small, it could be specific, right? But it should be yours. And it should be something that you should be walking right into. You want to think of your entrance as sort of a curtain, right? The gap is where you walk in. And that's exactly what you want to demonstrate, is lead us to that point, that seam that you are going to enter through, all right? So notice too that as they end their introduction here at the bottom of this example, that they manage to connect their own goals to suggestions from previous research. They're still citing right here, Bernstein and Bethune, right there in the last few sentences. But notice what they're doing here. They're justifying their goals. They say this research might allow high schools to aid their students differently based on anatomical or physiological differences, or lead to better stress management and performance later in life, as teens have a much easier time repairing the damage on the brain caused by stress than adults. By catching and finding a pattern early, it could find advanced paths for stress to be managed and not lead to possible negative consequences such as anxiety or depression. Now, that is all paraphrased information from sources, and at the same time, it is also providing a call to further research for this student. So if you think about the way that you might have ended your presentations or your research, you might have even given or proposed some questions for future researchers. Many of you in your presentations mentioned that if you were to continue researching, you would have blank. Or if you were to give advice to other researchers, what would you ask them to do? Likewise, a lot of research that's out there probably provides these same kinds of moves, these same kinds of suggestions. Is it possible that you can connect what you were trying to do here with a suggestion or an implication that was could be derived from other people's research? If you can bring in that connection, now you're providing a really solid justification and argument for why you're researching, right? Because here's a researcher, Bernstein, in 2016, and it's worth noting that this is a paper from, I think, 2017, 2018, who just a year or two before, which is not a long time in the research world, right? Research world moves ahead in years, news cycle moves ahead in days. Things are slower there. So 2016, very recent in terms of research years, right? If you're finding a source like that is fairly recent, that either implies or states a call or a need for future research, that's a golden opportunity for you to bring that into the conversation and say, look, here is a justification, and here is a clear statement of what my goal is going to be, because other researchers have laid that goal out, right? They've suggested it as not only something that should be looked at, but that could be looked at. So that said, this kind of commentary is what I want to continue to do and look at with methods next time. So next class, when you log in next week, I will plan on having another video for you guys to look at on Tuesday, one in which I do the same thing, looking through the methods section of another paper and talking about what are not just the qualities of it, but what are some of the things that relate to you. So some takeaways then from this whole thing, right? The first thing is this: make sure that you are defining key terms early, okay? So number one, define key terms early. Number two, think about how you want to reorganize this lit review. What kind of story do you want to tell? Do you want to divide it in terms of these topical clusters that will build off of each other, maybe starting with foundational topics and then moving to more specific topics? Do you want to break it down by competing theories? Do you want to show us the various sides of the issue or perspectives on your issue and break it into that, allowing you to sort of come in to maybe settle the debate? And how do you want to put these sources in conversation with each other? What kind of story do you want to tell? And how will you justify the gap in the research? How will you justify the value of your research and what has been called for or suggested by previous research that now justifies you making your grand entrance? So those are the pieces you need to be considering as you revise this. And I do wish you the best of luck, guys. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in touch.